I remember I was 10 blocks away the day of 9/11. I do work for the federal court, and I was down meeting with the judge. And as I was walking from the subway through this alley in between the old courthouse and the police building, it was a big crash, and a bunch of guards were there, and we looked at each other. New York, there's always something blown up, a substation. We didn't really think much of it. And when I got up to the judge's chambers, which is in the old building, people are kind of scurrying around, and I had a quick meeting with her before she had a trial, and she said, something's happened, something's going on here. And she brings me over to the window, and I look out her window, which is facing the World Trade Center towers, and you could see, we didn't see what happened. All we saw was smoke billowing, papers flying, and things flying. And she was distressed because she didn't have a television. Most judges have televisions for events like this. Well, not like this, but... and when I started to try to head home, and I probably got the last subway out of that area, and Curtis he's a photographer, he was working at a studio down on 29th Street, and when I called him, and I didn't have a cell phone in those days, and he said, the first tower's down. And I said, what do you mean down? What do you mean down? And, we've all seen this thing over and over and over again. They've replayed it so many times. And I was thinking, how could it come down like that? You just don't see something come down in that fashion.
Like right in its own footprint.
It just doesn't make any sense.
Right, because you'd expect, hypothetically, if it were falling, it'd fall in the area that's weakest. It wouldn't be just a purely centered...
That section of the top would kind of...
Right, should have actually tipped over.
Because as the steel weakened, you'd think it would start to bend, and that's what would
go
happen,
with the
like
momentum,
the Titanic. All these theories about how the Titanic went up like this, and it finally broke under its own weight, or whatever. And... first of all, I'm a very naive person. I always try to believe the best in everything. And it's really, it takes my breath away. It really takes my breath away.
But before I sent you any of this information, had you seen any of this? Had you heard about any of this?
I hadn't.
And if somebody would have just come up to you and said, what do you think about 9/11 truth? What would you have said?
I said, I don't know, what are you talking about? Explain what it is. And, I don't read the New York Times every day. I cleaned up. My papers cover this office, top to bottom. I'm working on 5 projects at once. I'm a sole practitioner. You can't even imagine what my days and nights are like. They go till midnight way too often. And, I listen to the news and the radio because I kind of like radio. There's something that I feel is less sensationalism about radio. I can't stand watching TV news. It's who was killed, who died,
Too much.
It's just too much. It's nothing I want to hear. And I listen to the radio and try to listen to what, maybe there's somebody there trying to make a point instead of trying to get his picture taken. So, and I haven't heard anything on radio about this.
Yeah, they have a tendency to keep this stuff kind of quiet, unfortunately.
I would see why.
There are some radio shows, or internet radio shows that'll play this, but it doesn't go on the air too often, unfortunately.
No, I can see why you're interested in, architects, because they have basically pulled the wool over our eyes. And I remember all my friends came to me after 9/11 and said, I can't believe that architect did a building that fell down like that. And I said, believe me, that building didn't just fall down like that, because we're talking the best structural engineers in the world, Weidlinger, a world-class architect. They're not going to have something that, it was obviously the jet fuel, what am I don't know anything about this technical, how hot jet fuel burns. It made sense to me that if it burned that hot, it could melt steel, but obviously that's not the case here. And all the other findings on some of the other sub-elements
Yeah, what piece of evidence that you never heard of, never saw until today, what do you think stuck out in your mind most?
Oh, the thermite.
Finding the thermite.
The thermite, number one. Number two, finding out that nothing in that building, jet fuel included, was burning hot enough to melt steel.
Right, and they still
Melt.
Right. People like to talk about how it was enough to damage steel, but most people forget that at towers 1, 2, and 7, there was evidence of melted liquid steel. So we're talking 2,500 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, 2,500 was what I remember seeing there.
And that's nowhere near what jet fuel can touch.
Yeah, and they talked about all the other various fires that burned for much longer than this one burned, and they only went to 1,200.
Right, you had the Sheraton Hotel burning for 18, 19 hours over 18 plus floors, 20 plus floors.
Yep. So, that whole steel issue and, fracturing and things that we saw pictures of. I think at the time, none of us thought anything of trucking away all of this steel because we all thought you've got to find survivors and the only way to do it is get it out of here. And obviously, as soon as they got it out of there, as
no more evidence.
One said, well, there goes the evidence. We should all know from watching CSI now that we're so smart about.
Should hang on to the evidence.
Don't touch anything. Don't do this. Don't do that.
I'm pretty sure the official report for World Trade Tower 7 actually involved zero analysis of any piece of steel from World Trade Tower 7. So they just completely just made it up and went with it.
Now, one of the things that I don't understand, and maybe because I haven't gotten quite to the end of this, we've got Tower 7, which is one issue, and then we've got the Twin Towers, which is another issue. Are his findings that both of them were planned by other than terrorists?
Well, his findings aren't necessarily about how it was planned and how it was coordinated, rather than strictly looking at whether they fell due to gravity and the damage that was done versus controlled demolition where there were explosives in the building. To infer that there were explosives in the building, I think lends itself to say that this wasn't an Al-Qaeda 19-member job and that it required, not to mention World Trade Tower 7, that's literally, it's a federal building, so you have a CIA room there. Right. So the list of tenants would infer itself that there's no way that some Al-Qaeda Muslim is just going to go into the tower and set up explosives. It is a federally watched and guarded building. So I think it might be fair to conclude that the only people with access to set up those controlled demolitions would have been either okayed by the government or the government itself. You
look at 3 buildings, all of which came down like this.
All right, and no other steel structure in history, no other building of those sizes has just come down onto its own footprint at free fall speed. I don't know. So to me, as a non-professional, it brought up a lot of questions, but I thank you very much for bringing up the professional questions. Thank you for being able to listen to the tough questions and maybe get the tough answers too.
Well, I think we all need to see this.